It's interesting that when you Google skeptics on it, you can't really find anything and it's shut down, as if this is just so blatantly obvious that anyone that denies that it's happening literally must be just a Looney Tune. But I'm curious, if it's so obvious, why spend so much energy shutting it down and censoring people that say otherwise? The Poynter Institute published this article in September with the headline reading, "There's a climate change angle on every beat." They're not kidding. Look at some of our sources that we pull from. AP, a story about mangroves. Kenyans are using hidden beehives to combat the logging industry. So these mangrove trees are declining and they want to preserve them, and the loggers are coming in, so they're trying to fend them off. And right smack dab in the middle of it, they say the reason the mangroves are dying off is because of logging, duh, and climate change. Look at this, a pretty harmless, nice story about a gingerbread city that recreates London landmarks in biscuit form. Of the many landmarks that they could have highlighted in this huge city of London, they made a building that was repurposed as a climate change monitoring facility, complete with an observatory and a cute little gingerbread man with a telescope. All right, it's not just AP, look at NPR. Do your plane rides feel bumpier than usual? Well, there's a reason for that. Scientists say climate change is making air turbulence worse. The Washington Post, global warming may cause sex changes in lizards. So human female athletes are not the actual ones at risk from all the trannies. It's the lizard dating scene that has actually fallen victim. So it really feels like if you've got a problem, blame it on climate change. Everything comes back to climate change. Now, what is the Poynter Institute? Well, from my understanding, it's an organization that helps train up journalists to fill in these roles as reporters at these outlets, these media outlets that we read, that we listen to, whether that's NPR, The Post, The Times. They're closely affiliated with PolitiFact and the Tampa Bay Times. And so they're basically training up journalists, the next generation of journalists, that on every single beat you can find climate change. Now, why is that problematic? Well, let's back up a little bit. I want to restate the goal of this channel. It's not to disprove the climate change narrative, okay? So that's not what I'm going to do in this video, but I want to help you discern whether a news outlet is getting you news or is pulling the strings on a puppet. Now, as journalists, we are storytellers, and every good story has a few components. There's the protagonist. You've got a goal, and then you've got an obstacle to that goal, a conflict, maybe even an antagonist. And here at World, we say that someone does something because, but. And the but is the conflict, the antagonist. Someone's trying to do something, but something gets in the way. And in all of these stories, the but is climate change.
Oh, he touched the butt.
Which, for one, is a bit boring. Like, when you have the same villain every single story for months and years on end, you get tired of that villain, and you figure out, and you don't really want to read anymore about that story because you know what that villain's going to do and whether or not that villain's going to win. And in many of these stories, that antagonist, that conflict, does win out. And there's not much the protagonist can do about that villain. In some instances, the story does adhere to someone does something because, but also climate change. So they'll stick to a great story structure and then unnecessarily throw in climate change. And the story did just fine without it. So why is this a problem? So again, this comes back to the question, what is your goal as a news outlet? Hopefully it would be to inform readers so that they can make the best decisions based off of all the information that's presented. And yet you short readers on information when you take up so much of the word count with how the story fits into climate change. And really, I think it's insulting to the readers, viewers, listeners, when they can't be trusted to weigh their own options and make responsible decisions themselves. They're told what to think instead of given information and encouraged to think. But here they're really just treating readers like little kids that aren't responsible for making their own decisions. When we're in the age of information, we have so much access to so much information, but no, we're told what to think, and you better think this way. And if you think otherwise, watch out. You might be on something.
I know what's going on. The oink, oink.
Yes, well, if you'll excuse me, I have some patients I
Now
really
listen
have
to me, you little quack. There was a half man, half
All of this is getting a bit ridiculous. Imposing this narrative on all of society and not allowing any dissent is creating a panic that's unhealthy and a little bit strange. Like the Senator, Catherine Clark, with her kid.
Remember, my middle child waking up with nightmares over concern around climate change.
But that kid's reaction is a microcosm to what's going to happen to the rest of the country if you keep this up. You scare them into thinking it's this issue that they can do nothing about and it's doomsday and it's alarming. This is what they've done with the election, as we're seeing in the recent weeks and months, that you've convinced people of a lie. They're enslaved to the fear of that lie, and only you as a news outlet who gives them information can alleviate that fear. It's a brilliant business model, but it's slimy and it's a disservice to readers. As journalists, we're supposed to be informing you and giving you the most valuable fact. World Watch, we're sifting through these sources, and it's frustrating when every single story has a climate change angle on it, because there's valuable information that we really would have loved to use and would have loved to include in our story that we didn't get at all, that wasn't included in the source, wasn't included in the reporting, and instead was tossed out so that they could say, oh, by the way, climate change is happening, the world's going to be underwater in 20 years, and there's nothing you can do about it. Another silly thing that goes across most of these outlets is the word consensus, that there's a scientific consensus. Again, look back in history, there's a scientific consensus that the world was flat and they were wrong. And so I don't think necessarily science should be done by consensus. It closes the door on any debate, any discussion, and discovery. And isn't that kind of what science is all about, is discovering and testing and trying out and hypothesizing these things? Consensus shuts that down. They're normally not very transparent as to who made that consensus and what percentage of the population of the scientific community made that. And by the way, there's a consensus about climate change. There's no denying that. There's not necessarily a consensus on its threat to humanity. And that's a part that they leave out, that they won't tell you. Now, I'm not necessarily surprised by this. Climate change has kind of become the god to most of these secular news outlets. So if you believe that everyone believes in something bigger than them and they reject God as that thing, something's got to fill that vacuum. In this instance, it's climate change, and it's about taking care of the earth. So it's like a religion, and the dedication to it is like a religion, and the defense of it is like religion. And I understand that, I just think they're wrong. It's interesting that when you Google skeptics on it, you can't really find anything and it's shut down, as if this is just so blatantly obvious that anyone that denies that it's happening literally must be just a Looney Tune.
I'm not the one to complain, Mr. Wefferly, but I thought you said no wuff stuff.
But I'm curious, if it's so obvious, why spend so much energy shutting it down and censoring people that say otherwise? It's sad because I think they're skimping out on other valuable reporting by saying just kind of obvious things over and over and over again. It's also concerning when a news outlet that's supposed to be unbiased in general makes unsubstantiated claims that something is false.
False.
It's the same thing with vaccines. When Trump selected RFK a few weeks ago, every news outlet was saying he has made false claims about vaccines and did not give any evidence as to why that is false. He might be wrong, you're right, but for you to just say that it's false instead of saying controversial is you're making a pretty big stand there. As a news outlet, remember, these are news outlets, not individual people with opinion. A good journalist, again, here's my point, a good journalist tells a story. And when you come at it from an angle like the Poynter Institute, that every single beat has a climate change angle, where's the room for discussion? Where's the room for just letting the story stand on its own and focusing on a different part of the story that might be interesting to a different audience? You're isolating your audience completely. At the end of the day, it actually is bad business practice. Hey, I'm Caleb Bailey. I'm a reporter with World Watch News, and we are a daily educational news program for students. Our team tackles current events and human interest stories all in one, while hopefully not leaving you stressed out. Along with these videos on YouTube, we have a full 10-minute show. And if you go to worldwatch.news/YouTube24 and use the code YouTube24, that's all caps YouTube24, you'll get the first month for free. So, if you like what we're doing here, try out our full news program. 10 minutes, 5 days a week. Just use the link in the code and we'll see you over there. Thanks for watching.